All right. So, good evening. My name is Paul Hughes. I'm the Regional Public Affairs Officer for GSA New England. I'll be working a lot with the media in your community over the course of the next several years as we try to keep you informed about all of these upcoming projects. On behalf of the U.S. General Services Administration, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. And I would especially like to thank St. Albans for use of this hall to hold this meeting. We really do appreciate that. Before we begin, I'd also like to introduce members of your congressional delegation. Michelle Monroe from Senator Walsh's office, Haley Perot from Senator Sanders' office, and Thomas Renner from Congresswoman Ballant's office. Thank you all for coming tonight. We look forward to the next few years up here in your community because we have a lot of things going on up here. In addition to Highgate Springs, we also have 4 other land ports of entry in Vermont that we're going to be working on. And this is our first opportunity to engage with you as a community to let you know what we're doing and how we're going to be progressing through these projects. In addition to these 5 ports, excuse me, we also have a nearly $18 million project to do renovation and energy upgrade work to the St. Albans Federal Building right down the street. That's going to put us up here, GSA up here in your community for the next 5 to 7 years. So if you have questions or if you have things you want to ask us as we progress, please visit our website, follow us on social media. That's my personal plug because I run all the social media channels. And please reach out to us. We'd love to answer your questions as we move forward. Tonight's session is more of a we want your comments. We won't be taking a lot of questions, but maybe some. So without any further ado, I'm going to shut up. Again, thank you all for coming. We look forward to working with you over the next several years. Ocean? John?
Thank you, Paul. Good evening, everybody. And again, thank you for coming out for tonight's meeting. My name is John Maurer. I'm a project manager with GSA's Design and Construction Division in Region 1. Tonight, this presentation will be given by Solve, who's our consultant who's been hired to do the environmental assessment in conjunction with the land port of entry at Highgate Springs. Ocean Paranjade is doing the audiovisual tonight. She's also the project manager for the project. And Leon, I pronounced your name earlier tonight. Somebody said I got it wrong. Kolinkovich?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And Leon will be up here at the podium as well, giving a presentation on the NEPA process. For those of you who aren't familiar with GSA and what we do, GSA provides 2 main services to the government and to the American taxpayer. There's a federal supply service that provides services in the forms of any company that wants to do business with the government, sell things, provide services, they provide contracts for those vehicles. We also have a branch that runs our fleets of cars. If you see a car driving down the highway with government plates on it, chances are it's come from GSA fleet. We also have a public building service, which is what we are part of. Those from GSA are here tonight. And in essence, PBS is the government's landlord and property manager. We operate, maintain, and oversee the design and construction of federal buildings, courthouses, and other facilities across the country. Here in New England, we cover all 6 states. We have the federal building down the street, as Paul mentioned, and one of the other unique pieces of property we operate and maintain is land ports of entry. Ports of entry traditionally were located at harbors where ships came into ports, and those have expanded to airports and also land crossings as well. So just up the road about 40 miles, not 40 miles, 40 miles from Burlington is the Highgate Springs Land Port of Entry, and we're planning on replacing that facility with a new port of entry. So tonight we'll discuss some of the reasons for that. As Paul mentioned, tonight's meeting will be informational. It's an opportunity for you to learn about this project and the process for it. The environmental assessment being done by Solve is part of the planning process and gives us an opportunity to solicit input from the public to ensure that we capture concerns and issues that need to be incorporated into the project. And this is the first phase. We get a draft copy of the environmental assessment later on, and before culminating in a final assessment and report, and that will be available to the public as well. And later in the presentation, we'll explain how comments can be submitted both tonight and also later on after tonight's meeting. Leon, would you give us an overview of the NEPA process? Sure. Thank you.
So, thanks everyone for coming out, by the way. The NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, is sometimes called the nation's Magna Carta of environmental laws, right? It requires federal agencies, in essence, to look before they leap, to analyze the potential impacts of a proposed action or project before they actually go ahead and conduct that. And it's an opportunity for the public to learn about the potential impacts and the alternative ways of getting a job done and to weigh in on or provide their input. And tonight, this so-called scoping or outreach meeting is your first opportunity to do that on the land port of entry just to the north of us. In order to have the comments during the so-called scoping period considered, they have to be in the form of written comments. Any verbal comment made tonight will be considered, but in order to be formally considered, it has to be written and submitted online, and it is an email. We'll have something here later on showing you how to do that. So, as I mentioned, NEPA requires all federal agencies to analyze the potential impacts of their projects and to consider alternative ways of doing things that may reduce some of those impacts, right? Agency responsibilities under NEPA include the documentation and public disclosure of environmental impacts and the alternatives that are analyzed. As we're going to get into a little bit later, there are going to be at least 3 alternatives analyzed in this so-called environmental assessment. So we also solicit public input on project alternatives to be analyzed, what you think the important resource areas are that we should look at in the analysis and documentation, and we coordinate with other agencies such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Vermont state agencies, Army Corps of Engineers, and so forth. Next. So NEPA is considered what we call an umbrella law in the sense that other laws for protecting the nation's natural and cultural heritage go along with it to try and reduce unnecessary time, bureaucracy, what have you. 3 key ones that we also do as part of the NEPA process are so-called Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act that requires federal agencies about to undertake an action to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and determine whether or not there are going to be potential effects on threatened and endangered species under the Federal Endangered Species Act. The second one listed up here is the Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the primary agency charged with implementing. And that requires so-called discharge or fill into waters of the United States, so-called navigable waters and wetlands to receive a 404 permit, Section 404 under the Clean Water Act. And so GSA will be coordinating with the Army Corps of Engineers local offices here to see what type of permit will be necessary, or if one will be at all, what the impacts on wetlands and waters will be. And then finally, we have Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, I think it is, and for the last half century, that's required all federal agencies about to undertake a project to look at the potential impacts on historic properties, which can be everything from old buildings to midden sites, prehistoric, historic properties, historic architecture, traditional cultural properties or TCPs that have importance to traditional communities and so forth. So that has to be done as well, and there will be a lot of coordination with the historic preservation officers of the tribes and the state of Vermont. Next. So this, in broad strokes, is the NEPA process. Here in 5 meat stacks or slices in a stack for you. We're at the beginning of it right now, the public outreach, or what we call the scoping process, because it helps determine what the scope of analysis is. What are the parameters? What resources are we looking at? What are the potential alternatives? What are the impacts people are most concerned about? We're going to perform this analysis after we, as we get into this scoping process and information comes in from the public and from other stakeholders such as agencies. And we'll be conducting the analysis, and when that is all done, it's going to be written up, and we will produce a document called an environmental assessment. And then we'll have a comment period, 30-day comment period. We're going to be having another meeting, perhaps right here in this very location at that time, probably sometime in the spring, is it we're thinking, early summer. It all depends on how it goes, but it can be as early as that. Oops, did I do something? Oh, okay, good. So the public review process is that 30-day comment period. And then we will issue a final EA if there are no significant impacts, right? In the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act process, the point of the EA is to determine whether or not there are any significant impacts on any of the resources that have been identified. If there are any significant impacts, that pushes it to something called an EIS, which is the same process but a bit more involved. Our anticipation is that an EA may be adequate in this case, but it all depends on how the process plays out. And that decision document, I think we can go to the next one. Well, it comes a little later. Okay, the purpose of the outreach process, I think I've already been through all of this. The solicited comments help inform our analysis. The draft EA analysis, develop a draft EA, environmental assessment. This includes an analysis of resource areas with the potential to be impacted by the proposed action and alternatives to that action. A public meeting. At the time we release the draft EIS, GSA will host another public meeting, as I've already mentioned, to solicit comments on the document and on the project itself. We will incorporate those public comments, consider them and incorporate them in revisions to the draft EA, and then we will release a final EA. Go ahead, Ocean. After the publication of the final EA, GSA will make a decision based on the analysis in the EA. If there, as I was saying before, if there are any anticipated significant impacts in any resource area, right, GSA will begin the preparation of an EIS, an environmental impact statement. Statement is a bit of a misleading term. You think, oh, here's a statement, as a declaration, 2 or 3 sentences long. Statements are more in-depth analyses, and there's greater scrutiny, more thorough analysis, etc. But if there are no anticipated significant impacts as a result of the analysis we're commencing now, GSA will issue a decision document. We typically, the ROD, the record of decision document stating what our reasoning was for concluding that there were no significant impacts and identifying what the course of action will be. Next. So, major contents of an EA, we start with the purpose and need for a project. We'll be getting into that in a little bit. What are we actually what's the agency trying to achieve with its proposal, with its proposed action? What are the alternative ways, step 2, what are the alternative ways of pursuing that? Step 3, you look at the affected environment. That doesn't mean encyclopedic treatment of everything. It means looking at those resources in the geographic area that might potentially be impacted by any of the alternatives under consideration. And then 4, the environmental consequences. What effects would the alternatives have? And some, if we have three alternatives, for example, with regard to some resources, each of the alternatives may have the exact same effects. You could have radically different effects depending on what the resource is. Noise versus water quality versus historic resources versus recreation opportunities versus socioeconomic effects, etc. And what can be done to try and avoid and minimize those effects. That's what we call mitigation measures. Project purpose and need. Am I doing this or are you?
You can do that.
Okay. Okay, so the purpose is to enhance the performance, safety, security, and efficiency of operations of GSA and its tenant agencies at the Highgate Springs LPOE along the U.S.-Canadian border. And the need related to that purpose is that the current LPOE does not presently have the capacity to accommodate projected increases in traffic or the infrastructure needed to ensure efficient operations. So there are times right now when it can be long waits there, for example, coming down from Canada. And it's only going to get worse with what is anticipated to be happening up there unless this measure is undertaken. Next. So, affected environment sections that I was alluding to before. These are some of the ones that we often have. A lot of these will be appearing in this document, and only as we get into it, we'll see if any can be dropped or others need to be added. So we'll have things like land use. What is the land use of the area now? What might the effects be on land use? Soils and geology. Is there any concerns related to that? Contamination of groundwater, although that's probably under water resources. The biological resources in the proposed site of the action, some of which is adjacent to the existing facility. Utilities, water, electricity. What are the supplies there now? What would they be proposed to be? Would there be any wider impacts from putting this new facility on existing utilities for the community? Traffic and transportation, that is a big one for this. It's related to the very purpose and need itself, of course. Visual resources, that may or may not be important in this area. In some projects in national parks, for example, visual resources are a huge part of the impacts we look at. Probably not so much here, but it's certainly one that we will consider whether or not we want to include. Air quality and climate change. In terms of climate change, it would be not so much what the effect of that, the proposals are on it, but what, in terms of anticipated or projected climate change, what might the effects be on operation of this facility, where it gets its energy and water from, and so forth. Cultural resources, that's related to the historic resources of the National Historic Preservation Act I mentioned earlier. Socioeconomics, how many jobs will be created and what will the impact be locally and regionally on the economy of, during the construction phase of this project, which could last, 2-3 years, I believe? Along those lines, yeah, at least. So, there will be some employment benefits. In some cases, and I don't know that it would be the case here, but some cases with big, huge projects, the production of a dam or, where you've got thousands of employees, not all the benefits are beneficial when it comes to socioeconomic, right? There may be a shortage of housing, that kind of thing. So socioeconomics can have pros and cons. Environmental justice, that's the impact on low income and minority communities of the proposals. Solid and hazardous waste. There may be sites there right now that have to be treated with kid gloves, right? Because they're hazardous materials or waste deposited there that have got to be handled properly during the construction process. Human health and safety, for the public and for workers, and noise. Will there be noise in different communities surrounding the project from trucks going through, for example? And is that important to the people who live there? Is it a major issue? So these are some of the resource areas that we often have in EAs of this. We're not saying that these exact ones will be in this particular one. Next. So looking at the big picture here, after completing the impacts analysis and considering public input, it's GSA's responsibility to finish the NEPA process by issuing the final environmental decision. So you see public input there on the left, our impact analysis informed by that, and then GSA will issue its final environmental decision. So again, here's that same diagram before of some of the major steps in the NEPA process. We are at the first one, right at the top, public outreach, or what we call scoping, January and February 2023. And again, then we'll be working on and issuing a draft EA to the public, releasing it to the public. And during that 30-day comment period, there'll be another opportunity to meet in person like this and to file formal written remarks, right? In order to be considered and to have an impact on the decision, they really have to be written down. Then we'll issue the final, GSA will issue the final EA and the decision document. So GSA welcomes all public input and has provided multiple ways to submit comments. And you can see the email address here with the subject line, or it can be mailed the old way, the traditional way, to the address that is right there. I believe you know, a lot of the documents will be on a website, correct? Yes. And you can see this presentation, I believe, will be there. So there are multiple ways to find out where to send things and to how to submit them.
Leon,
yeah.
That slide displayed at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, we'll be showing this again later. All right. John, thanks everyone.
John, could you speak into the mic, please?
Sure. Okay, now we'll give you a little bit of background on the project itself. That was a nice aerial view of the Highgate Springs Land Court of Entry. For those of you who haven't been there or through it, it's, let me talk about that. That's okay. It's located on Interstate 89. It's about 40 miles north of Burlington, and it handles both commercial and non-commercial traffic. It's a facility that's open 24/7, and it's one of the 3 busiest land ports of entry in New England. Not all of the ports of entry are open all of the time. Not all of them can handle all types of cargo coming through. So Highgate is exceptional in that it will handle basically everything at any time. There's a couple exceptions there, but we won't get into that. Next slide, please. It was built, the current facility was built in 1997. It replaced one that was, I think, built back in the 30s or 30s, I think, and was expanded twice. And it's located on approximately 16 acres of land. This is the port here. The land we own goes basically up to the Canadian border and down south to about here. This site here is the site of the former Welcome Center owned by the state of Vermont. Next slide. This is a closer aerial view. We have 7 buildings at the site. In total, there are about 44,000 square feet. There are 5 POV lanes, or personally owned vehicles, passenger vehicles. Located here. Bus lane is located on the east side of the building, and commercial trucks and vehicles come through on the west side of the building over here. Next slide. There's 4 agencies that have a presence at the port. Customs and Border Protection is our main tenant there. We also have Food and Drug Administration and APHIS, which is part of the Department of Agriculture. They inspect, that's the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. And GSA also has a presence there for ourselves and also our O&M contractors that operate and maintain the facility for us. This is a brief discussion of basically why we're doing the port now. Next slide, please. Just north of us, Canada has begun construction of highway project along Autoroute A35. That's a highway that was they began construction back in the 1960s, and the last segments of it need to be built. Currently, the highway extends all the way down to roughly here. I believe these green portions have already been done, and it's these 2 portions here. It's about 10 miles long that need to be built. They're currently building the first portion, and that is slated to be completed in about 2025, I believe. we haven't received a date for the completion of the final portion. The issue with this highway is once it's completed, we anticipate that traffic through Highgate will increase by as much as 30%. On an average weekday, that might not be a problem, but on busy weekends, during the summer, any of you who pass through there when traffic has been heavy, that will have a significant impact on wait times for traffic coming through the port. It's anticipated that wait times could increase to as much as 100 minutes, basically between an hour and a half and 2 hours for each vehicle going through the port. So that would have a huge impact on commerce and people's patience going through the port. Next slide, please. Additionally, even though the port is only about 20 years old, we're already beginning to see issues with the condition of the buildings themselves. These have an impact on CBP's operations at the port, FDA and APHIS. They've lowered the site's energy performance, and they've increased our costs for operating and maintaining the facility. There are more repairs that need to be done, which increase the cost for us and our tenants and the taxpayer. And as I mentioned, people are beginning to experience long wait times even now, so that impacts the quality of service being provided by CBP. The number of inspection lanes, there's only 5 for passenger vehicles, 1 each for buses and trucks. That limits throughput capacity. And the configuration of the lanes coming into the port from Canada, that kind of snaking or bend effect, limits CBP's ability to anticipate traffic as it's coming to the port and what types of vehicles are arriving. There's even an issue with traffic having to crisscross each other, since buses which are arriving from Canada, if they stop at the duty-free facility in Canada, they then need to cross all the lanes of traffic to get to our bus inspection lane, which is on the left side of our building. Similarly, trucks that come from Canada, which are in the left lane, they now need to cut across traffic to get into the right lane for where the truck inspection facility is. So we're hoping to remedy some of those issues as well with the new port. The environmental assessment will analyze action and no action alternatives. Basically, what are the consequences if we do something, and well, if we decide not to do anything, what are the consequences going to be? The action alternatives are basically looking at what will happen if we build a new port with larger facilities for CBP and the other agencies. And then what would the consequences be if we don't do anything? Well, we already know there will be an impact to traffic going through the port, but are there any other consequences that need to be considered as well? Next slide. This is a list of some of the key, key components of the action alternatives. It's likely we will need to acquire additional land adjacent to the port, demolish the existing buildings and build newer buildings, larger buildings, construct facilities for our 4 agencies, and provide the support facilities they need for parking and things like snow storage. And then construct up to 7 new POV lanes and up to 4 new commercial primary inspection lanes. That would increase the POV lanes by 40% and would double the number of lanes we have available for both trucks and buses. So the action alternatives would require additional land. This gives an aerial view of potential directions that the expansion would occur in, south of the existing port and then towards the west. Again, the current site is about 16 acres, so that we've determined that that really isn't adequate for what we need to do. And this is just a comparison of a couple of alternatives in terms of the number of lanes. Not a big difference in the POV lanes or the buses or the commercial lanes, but the big difference for CBP is that one alternative allows for future expansion. The other alternative, because if lanes were to be located between existing buildings, you're limited by how many lanes you can fit between those buildings, because otherwise 20 years from now, you're faced with the same problem. You can't expand because you need to tear everything down. So if we can come up with a design that allows for future expansion, that would be much more preferable. That's the end of this portion of our presentation this evening. Again, here are the opportunities to provide comments tonight or after tonight's meeting. We have comment cards at the back of the room. Please feel free to hand in your comments on those tonight, or you can email comments as well. And if you'd like, and put a postage stamp on something, I'll get it in the mail. Okay. And a couple of people have mentioned that there is a project website that information will be posted at. The one that went out in the letter to people, everybody, was quite long. We were able to get it shortened, so this is, if you can't remember this, at least it's easier to find and type into your laptop. So